Imagine being handed $100 million tomorrow. No instruction manual, no training, no rules, just money. For most people, that sounds like a dream. But for families who have kept their fortunes alive for 3, 4, even 10 generations, that scenario is their worst nightmare. Because here's the truth that nobody talks about. Inherited wealth is one of the most dangerous things you can give a child. Without the right preparation, it doesn't liberate them, it destroys them. The Vanderbilts lost one of America's greatest fortunes within 2 generations. The heirs of lottery winners are statistically more likely to go bankrupt than people who never won at all. And study after study confirms the ancient proverb shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. But then there are the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Ponts, families whose wealth has not only survived, it has multiplied across 6, 8, even 12 generations. What do they know that everyone else doesn't? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the exact methods old money families use to raise children who don't just receive wealth, but are built to carry it, grow it, and pass it on. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn doesn't just apply to billionaires. It applies to anyone who wants to build something that outlasts them. The mindset difference. Old money versus new money. Before we get into the tactics, we need to understand the philosophy, because without it, the tactics make no sense. When a new millionaire makes money, the instinct is celebration, reward, freedom. They think of wealth as a destination. They arrived, and because they arrived, the goal is now to enjoy it. Old money families think about wealth in an entirely different category. To them, wealth is not a destination. It is a responsibility that was handed to them and must be handed forward. They see themselves not as owners of the family fortune, but as custodians of it. Stewards, temporary managers of something that belongs to a lineage extending centuries into the future. This is not abstract philosophy. It shapes everything: how children are spoken to about money, how they earn their first dollar, what school they attend, who they marry, and how they're allowed to access family funds. The Rockefeller family is perhaps the clearest case study. John D. Rockefeller Sr. was the richest private individual in American history, worth the equivalent of over $400 billion in today's money. Yet he raised his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., not in extravagance, but in discipline. Jr. kept meticulous ledger books of every penny he earned, spent, and saved from childhood. His allowance was tied to performance and accountability. When he grew up, he didn't squander the fortune. He multiplied it, establishing a trust structure that still operates today, over 6 generations later, managing wealth for an estimated 170-plus descendants. That is not an accident. That is a system. The deliberate delay of disclosure. Here's something that will surprise you. Most children raised in old money families do not know the full extent of their family's wealth until well into adulthood. This is intentional. Wealth managers and estate planners who work with ultra-high net worth families consistently advise that educational conversations begin before fully revealing the extent of the wealth children will inherit. The reasoning is straightforward. If a child knows they will inherit $50 million at age 21, every lesson about hard work, every struggle, every incentive to build something of their own evaporates. Old money families understand this deeply. Children are raised with visible comfort, good schools, travel, cultural exposure, but without the specific numbers. They know the family has resources. They don't know how many zeros are on the balance sheet. This creates a fascinating psychological effect. Children develop their own ambitions, their own identity, their own work ethic, not in spite of wealth, but before it. By the time the full picture of the family fortune is revealed, often in the mid to late 20s, the heir has already developed the character to handle it. The contrast with families who tell their children everything early is stark. Entitlement, the single most corrosive force in intergenerational wealth, grows in the gap between knowing you're rich and having earned the right to feel that way. The rule, build the person first, reveal the fortune second. The allowance system as a financial training ground. Old money families do not give children money freely. Even in households worth hundreds of millions of dollars, children typically receive structured allowances tied to responsibility. And those allowances are treated with extreme seriousness. This seems almost comically modest when you think about it. A billionaire family haggling over whether their 10-year-old did enough chores to earn their $20. But this is precisely the point. The allowance is not about the money. It is a laboratory, a practice environment where the stakes are low enough that mistakes don't ruin lives, but structured enough that real lessons land. In many wealthy families, the allowance is divided into 3 categories from a very young age: a portion to save, a portion to spend, and a portion to give. That last bucket, the giving portion, is especially significant. We'll come back to philanthropy later, but this early habit of directing money toward causes outside oneself is fundamental to the old money ethos. What's even more interesting is how some of these families structure the earning of that allowance. Children aren't just handed money for existing. They complete tasks, track their earnings in ledger books, yes, actual handwritten ledgers in some households, and are required to account for how they spent previous allowances before receiving new ones. One Reddit thread on this subject featured a 4th-generation inheritor who described their system in detail. I only get specific amounts at certain ages. Before 35, I have to ask my mother and our family notary and explain what I need the money for. That's not poverty thinking. That's discipline engineering, applied at the highest levels of wealth. The lesson? Money that is explained, accounted for, and justified at any scale becomes money that is respected. Education as social architecture. When old money families choose where to send their children to school, they are not primarily thinking about academic rankings. They are thinking about network architecture. This is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of intergenerational wealth. The schools that old money families have sent their children to for generations, Eton in England, Exeter and Groton in America, La Rosey in Switzerland, are not simply places of academic instruction. They are social incubators that produce the networks of trust and influence that will define a child's adult life. Eton College alone has produced 20 British prime ministers and generations of royalty. The Lawrenceville School in New Jersey, founded in 1810, counts billionaire publisher Malcolm Forbes and Disney CEO Michael Eisner among its alumni. These are not coincidences. They are the product of deliberate social investment. Elite boarding schools are understood by researchers as centers of what sociologist Peter Cookson called deep structure socialization. Students don't just learn Latin and calculus. They internalize the assumption that they are meant to lead. They are surrounded by peers who will become senators, CEOs, central bankers, and judges. The friendships formed at 14 in a dormitory will open doors at 40 in a boardroom. Old money families also invest heavily in what researchers call intellectual capital. The accumulated knowledge, cultural literacy, and critical thinking that cannot be bought quickly. Children are raised in households where ideas are debated at the dinner table, where art and literature and history are not electives but assumed fluency. This isn't pretentiousness, it's competitive advantage. The ability to move comfortably in elite intellectual and social spaces is a skill that takes decades to develop, and old money families start developing it at birth. Languages are also central to this strategy. Many old money families ensure children speak 2 or 3 languages fluently, often through gap years, international internships, or extended immersion programs. This is not purely academic. In a world where wealth is increasingly global, language is a key that unlocks relationships and deals that monolingualism cannot reach. The family constitution and governance structure. Here is where old money strategy gets genuinely sophisticated, and where most people have no idea what they're looking at, even if they see it. The most successful multi-generational wealth families operate not just as families, but as institutions. They create formal governance structures, complete with written constitutions, advisory boards, regular family meetings, and documented decision-making processes that outlast any individual member. The Rothschild family is perhaps the most stunning example of this. The Rothschilds have been one of the wealthiest families in the world for over 200 years. Not because their investments were always perfect, not because they never faced adversity, but because from the very beginning, Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the patriarch who built the fortune from a Frankfurt ghetto, instilled in his 5 sons the principle that the family was stronger together than apart. The family created formal structures that governed how wealth was managed, distributed, and grown. They created what we might today call a family constitution, a governing document that outlined shared values, investment philosophy, and rules for how heirs could access family resources. The Rothschild approach included creating what they called family banks, internal structures where younger generation members could apply for capital to pursue entrepreneurial ventures. This is extraordinary. Rather than simply receiving a distribution, heirs had to pitch their ideas to family leadership, develop business plans, and demonstrate capability. The family bank was both a financial instrument and a training ground for business thinking. The Rockefellers took a similar approach. Rather than distributing wealth outright to heirs, John D. Rockefeller Jr. created a series of trusts, managed by professional institutional trustees at Chase Bank, that governed distributions according to strict rules. Heirs didn't receive lump sums. They accessed funds through a structured process, articulating the purpose of the withdrawal and receiving it only in alignment with family principles. Education expenses, healthcare, business investment, approved. Impulsive spending? The trustees said no. This structure accomplished something brilliant. It protected heirs from themselves, especially in youth, while simultaneously teaching them that family wealth was a governed resource, not a private ATM. Modern old money families hold regular family meetings, sometimes quarterly, where financial matters are discussed openly, investment strategies are reviewed, and younger members are progressively included in decision-making. Some families even create youth advisory boards, where children as young as 10 participate in age-appropriate financial discussions, building familiarity and fluency with wealth management concepts long before the stakes become real. Trusts, legal structures, and strategic delay. One of the most powerful tools in the old money toolkit is the carefully constructed trust and the deliberate delay of when heirs gain access to it. Many families structure trust distributions in stages, a common model, 1/3 of the inheritance at 25, half at 30, and the remaining balance at 35. This isn't arbitrary. It reflects a hard-won understanding that the person at 25 is not the same person at 35, and that the judgment required to manage millions develops gradually, not all at once. The conditions attached to trust distributions are also instructive. Trustees can be, and often are, instructed to release funds only for specific approved uses: education, healthcare, home purchase, business investment. Funds cannot be accessed simply because the heir wants them. They must be justified. Beyond the financial benefit, this structure has a powerful psychological effect. It reframes the heir's relationship with wealth from entitlement to stewardship. They learn viscerally that the money is not theirs to squander. It is a resource they are managing on behalf of the family's past and future. There is also a protective dimension to trust structures that old money families take very seriously. Shielding wealth from external threats. A well-constructed trust protects assets from divorce settlements, creditor claims, lawsuits, and bankruptcy. The Rockefeller trusts explicitly included these protections, ensuring that even if an individual heir made poor decisions in their personal life, the family's core wealth remained untouched. This is why the Rockefellers, 6 generations after John D. built the fortune, still have an operational family office managing assets for over 170 descendants, while the Vanderbilts, who distributed their wealth directly to individual heirs without structured trusts, saw the fortune dissipate entirely within 2 generations. The legal architecture matters profoundly. Philanthropy as character engineering. Every serious old money family has a significant philanthropic component to their wealth strategy. And, while outsiders often interpret this as tax optimization or reputation management, and yes, it can be both, within the family, philanthropy serves a far more important purpose. It teaches children that wealth is a tool, not a trophy. When children are brought into philanthropic decision-making from a young age, when they sit in on foundation board meetings, when they help decide which causes to support, when they're asked to articulate why a particular donation matters, they develop something that cannot be manufactured any other way: a relationship with money that is oriented toward impact rather than consumption. The Rothschild approach explicitly included participation in family philanthropy as a core element of heir development. Children who grew up attending foundation meetings and philanthropic discussions developed a deeply embedded sense of purpose around the family's wealth, a why that made the stewardship feel meaningful rather than burdensome. The Rockefeller Foundation, established in 1913, has distributed over $2 billion in grants and is still operating today. But perhaps more importantly, it gave every subsequent generation of Rockefellers a vehicle for engagement with the family legacy that went beyond simply receiving a check. There's a practical wisdom here too. A person who finds deep meaning in what their wealth does, in the research it funds, the communities it builds, the crises it addresses, is far less likely to blow it on yachts and gambling. Purpose is the most powerful antidote to the recklessness that so often accompanies sudden or unearned wealth. Work experience and the deliberate rejection of entitlement. Here is something that genuinely surprises most people. Many children from old money families are required to work before they can access family wealth. Not suggested, not encouraged, required. This takes different forms across different families. Some require their children to hold independent employment, in a field entirely unrelated to the family business for a minimum number of years before entering the family enterprise. The purpose is not the income. It is the experience of being accountable to someone outside the family, of being evaluated not on their last name, but on their performance, of understanding what it means to need a paycheck. Others require heirs to build their own independent financial baseline, demonstrating that they can sustain themselves before trust distributions begin in earnest. Some go further. Heirs must submit a business plan, complete a matching investment challenge, where the family matches whatever the heir earns independently, or demonstrate a track record of sound financial decision-making. This principle, sometimes called the earn it first philosophy, runs deep in old money culture. Warren Buffett, while not old money by definition, articulated it perhaps most famously when he said he intended to leave his children enough money so that they feel they could do anything, but not so much that they could do nothing. Old money families operationalize this intuition through structure. They don't just hope their children will develop a work ethic. They engineer the conditions that make developing one necessary. What's remarkable is the result. Children raised this way often appreciate the wealth more deeply than if it had been handed to them freely. They understand what it represents because they've had a small taste of what it takes to build something. And that understanding is the foundation of everything else. The cautionary tale: why most wealth doesn't survive. We've spent most of this video on what old money families do right, but the picture isn't complete without understanding what happens when families don't do these things. The statistics are brutal. Studies consistently show that 70% of wealthy families lose their fortune by the second generation, 90% by the third. The shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb exists in virtually every culture on earth. In Chinese, it's rice paddy to rice paddy in 3 generations. In Italian, dalle stelle alle stalle, from the stars to the stable. The Vanderbilts are the most cited American example. Cornelius Vanderbilt built one of the largest fortunes in American history, equivalent to roughly $200 billion today. He controlled the railroads. He was, by any measure, a titan. Yet when 120 of his descendants gathered at a Vanderbilt family reunion in 1973, there was not a single millionaire among them. The fortune was gone. The cause? Cornelius left his fortune in large direct bequests to individual heirs, without trusts, without conditions, without governance structures. The heirs competed, spent, and divided, without a stewardship framework, without the education to manage it, and without the values that had built it in the first place. The fortune simply evaporated. The lesson the financial planning world has drawn from the Vanderbilt story is this: it is not market crashes or bad luck that destroys family wealth. It is the absence of prepared heirs. Financial studies consistently show that the primary cause of wealth dissipation across generations is a breakdown in communication, preparation, and shared values, not investment performance. This is why the preparation methods we've discussed aren't luxuries or indulgences. They are survival mechanisms. What anyone can learn from old money families. Here's what I want to leave you with, because everything we've discussed today is not only relevant to families with generational fortunes. It is directly applicable to anyone who wants to build something that outlasts them. Whether you're passing down $500,000 or $500 million, the principles are the same. 1. Start financial education early, not lectures, practice. Allowances with accountability, ledgers, savings goals. Let children make real financial decisions with real small consequences. 2. Be intentional about what you disclose and when. Build the person before revealing the full picture of the resources.
3. Create structure around wealth transfer. Don't just hand money over. Think about conditions, timelines, and purposes. A trust doesn't require millions to establish. Even a structured inheritance plan written into a will accomplishes much of the same philosophical work. 4. Cultivate a network with intention. The schools you can afford, the communities you join, the relationships you build. These are forms of wealth that can be passed down just as surely as financial assets. 5. Make philanthropy a family practice, not just a personal preference. Teaching children to use resources in service of something larger than themselves is one of the most powerful things any parent can do. 6. Require your children to work. Not because they need the money, because they need the experience, the dignity of earning, the discipline of showing up, the humility of being evaluated on merit. These cannot be simulated. 7. Document your values. Write a family mission statement. Hold family meetings about money. Talk openly about what wealth means to your family and what you want it to accomplish. The families that lose wealth across generations almost always share one characteristic: they stopped talking. The old money families that have survived centuries did not do so by accident. They survived because they built systems, legal, educational, psychological, and relational, that were stronger than any individual's mistakes. You don't need a dynasty to start acting like one. The greatest inheritance you can give a child is not money. It is the capacity to manage money wisely. The old money families who have kept their fortunes alive for generations understood this intuitively and built everything else around it. If this video gave you a new way to think about wealth, legacy, and how we prepare the people we love for what we leave behind, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below telling me which of these strategies surprised you the most. I'll be back with more content that goes beyond the surface, because understanding how wealth really works is one of the most powerful things you can do, regardless of where you're starting from. See you in the next one.